Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, you all are having a wonderful day today. Excuse me. Uh, anyway, so I thought that I would commentate on this on the UFC 259 fight card, and let's just basically get into it. So I went 3-2 yesterday on the fight cards, meaning that I had three right predictions and two wrong predictions. If you wanted to count the prelim fights, then I would have even more of a positive record. But since I didn't really predict the prelims on my YouTube channel, I can't necessarily, get myself more of a positive record. I did predict Askarov to win the fight against Benavidez. I was correct on that one. I predicted France to win that one. He won that one, although barely. And when it came down to it, by the hairs of his chinny chin chin. I also predicted Dominic Cruz to win, and he won, although he did not look overly impressive. And to be honest with you, I think it most likely is time for Dominic to retire because he does not look like the same fighter that he once was. Not only that, but I do think a certain amount of people are starting to catch up to Dominic in terms of his style. I do think that his style does have flaws that, in past time were not really exploited a certain amount. Not only that, but he's losing his athleticism a little bit. You can just tell he's just not the same fighter that he used to be. But it is what it is. So that's my take on the Dominic Cruz situation. Anyway, let's talk about the five main fights. So first fight to talk about, Alexander Rakic versus Thiago Santos. This fight pretty much ended up the way that I thought it was going to. I predicted Rakic to take the fight. I thought he won at least the last two rounds. A certain amount of people, when I was watching it, I was at a table of six people, including me, yesterday, watching it with some friends. And most of us thought Rakic took it, but a lot of us also had the opinion that it could have went either way. But I thought Rakic did take it. He outdid him in the clinch. They both were landing strikes. I think that the commentary seemed a bit biased towards Thiago, but it is what it is. At least from what I remember. I know that they were showing Thiago's strikes a lot in the replay and not really showing a lot of Rakic's. But Rakic, I thought, won that fight. And he did end up winning that fight. I believe he won by unanimous decision. So good on him. And that's probably going to be the next guy, maybe Glover Teixeira, that faces Jan Blachowicz next. And I was pronouncing that name incorrect this whole entire time. I kept saying Blachowicz. It's actually Blachowicz. So my bad there. But when it comes down to the overall, that is probably going to be the guy that's going to face Jan Blachowicz next. And that's a very interesting fight because the kid is very lengthy. He's got decent power, decent clinch. Can he beat Jan Blachowicz? Well, we'll just have to see. But when it comes down to the overall, I think that that's a very interesting fight. But Rakic pretty much won the way that I thought he was going to. Thiago Santos, he does have somewhat of a limited skill set, very powerful. But I just didn't think he was going to be able to do Rakic, and he didn't. So it is what it is. Next fight, Drew Dober versus Islam Makhachev. I believe is how you pronounce his name. And that fight pretty much went how I thought it was going to go. For the first minute, they were going to strike, and then Islam Makhachev basically got him down to the ground. And once that happened, it pretty much was over. I actually missed the finish because I had to use the restroom at the time when Makhachev got the finish. I believe he got... what is that choke called? Not a DR's choke, but is it a bulldog choke? I'm not sure. I can't remember what type of choke it is, but he got a certain type of choke. And basically he stopped Drew Dober. So very good performance by Makhachev. Makhachev, I believe, fights at 155. We'll have to see what he does later on in the future. Very interesting fighter. Those Dagestan, however you pronounce it. Those Dagestan Russian fighters like Khabib Nurmagomedov and Makhachev and those guys, man, they don't screw around, man. They're real deal fighters. They're excellent wrestlers. And Drew Dober, from what I researched, he was not going to be able to handle him on the ground, and I got it exactly right. So I hit the nail right on the head with the first two fights. The third fight was interesting because going into this fight, like I said, I thought it was a 50-50 fight. But the more, and let me say this. I actually did not do enough research on this fight. I thought that I had seen a good enough sample size at both of them to where I said, okay, well, I'm favoring Jan by a little bit. But, when I take a look at the fight, Petr Yan versus Aljamain Sterling, when I studied it a little bit after I released the video about a week ago, I realized that Aljamain Sterling actually has a lot of flaws. And he reminds me, Aljamain Sterling, what he is that he is the 135-pound version of Yair Rodriguez. And a certain amount of people may not agree with that. He throws these very wide, flashy strikes, but a lot of them really don't have any substance. And what I mean by that is that they're not timed very well. They're not they're not doing a lot of damage because he misses a lot of them. So it is what it is. Petr Yan looked like the much better fighter in that ring yesterday to me. I'm not going to say the much better fighter, but significantly the better fighter to me yesterday. And I predicted Petr Yan to win. He had the advantage in the striking, he had the advantage in the wrestling, and I predicted that Petr Yan actually would have the advantage in the grappling. And Aljamain Sterling said that he was going to try to make this a grappling match. Aljamain Sterling couldn't even compete with Petr Yan in the grappling category. And I thought Petr Yan just won the first round. So I believe one of the judges had Aljamain Sterling up on the card, which to me was a bit of a shock because I don't know, according to UFC rules, I don't know how you score that first round for Aljamain Sterling because you had to have. But when it comes down to the overall, I don't know how you scored that first round for Aljamain Sterling. The first round I thought went to Petr Yan because Aljamain Sterling was winning it at first. Petr Yan was not throwing enough. But Petr Yan then eventually knocked him down. He also took him down, I believe, once or twice. You have to give Petr Yan that round, in my opinion. He did more damage, and he pretty much dominated the whole second half of the round. So even when you want to talk about dominance, they dominated, one half of the round. So Petr Yan, I had him one round up already. Second round, not much really happened. Aljamain Sterling pretty much had him pinned up against the cage, was clinching with him. Petr Yan, I think, maybe got taken down once. I think he got taken down once, maybe this whole entire fight. Very good takedown defense by Petr Yan. And overall, Aljamain Sterling, wasn't able to do a whole lot that round, but he was able to get in the clinch. And one of the guys next to me, who also seemed to know a decent amount about UFC, is like, well, yeah, they're probably going to have to give this round to Sterling. And I said, yeah, they're going to have to because Petr Yan's just not able to do anything. So Aljamain Sterling won that second round. The third round, tough one, but I thought Petr Yan was landing more power punches. I thought that he was getting to him a little bit more. And I said, okay, well, I think Petr Yan's starting to hurt him. They both look a little bit tired, but I think Petr Yan is winning this fight. And then that fourth round comes. And Petr Yan, at this point, in my opinion, he's taking him down multiple times. He's hurting him. He's striking him. And then comes that stupid, moronic knee that he throws. And I knew as soon as I saw it, I said, oh my God, he did not just do that. He did not just fuck up the fight that stupidly in that fashion. And it's exactly what he did. And for a certain amount of the people overall that don't know, you are allowed to throw certain knees, especially, I believe, if their knees and hands are off the ground. But if their hands and knees are on the ground, you're not allowed to throw knees to the head. And he threw, I'm not sure if it was blatant or if it was just in the heat of the moment. I don't know. Either way, you cannot do something stupid like that. And this doesn't seem to be the only time where Petr Yan has had a difficulty following directions. In the Jose Aldo fight, it also seemed to be a little bit of an issue too. I'm not sure if it's the language barrier, but either way, you have to know the rules. You have to know the rules. And when it comes down to it, you cannot do something stupid like that. It's very unfortunate because I actually was rooting for Petr Yan. Now, once again, I'm not a fan of any of these MMA fighters, but there are certain people that I root for in the fight because I think they're all around the better fighter or overall that I just, kind of root for. Petr Yan was one of those guys that I was rooting for because not only did I think that he was the all-around better fighter, but I thought a lot of people were going hard on him. A lot of people were calling him a paper champion. A lot of people overall were saying that, he's had this easy route, and even though he's faced Jose Aldo, Jimmy Rivera, and a certain amount of these other guys, some of the same guys that Aljamain Sterling has fought, and he was beating Aljamain Sterling. He was starting to beat him up bad, but that dumb-ass knee that he threw in the fourth round, it cost him the fight. And a certain amount of people, they're going to call Aljamain Sterling a paper champion, and a certain amount of other things. And listen, we'll see in time. We'll see in the rematch, which I assume is going to happen. Let's hope, because I do believe that Petr Yan does deserve a rematch. But I can't say that what I'll say is this: Petr Yan cost himself the fight. He had the fight in his hands. He was going to win the fight, in my opinion. Of course, besides on one judge scorecard, which I thought is absolutely fucking ridiculous. But when it comes down to the overall, he would have won that fight had he not done that. And he probably, in all honesty, would have knocked Sterling out in the 5th round had that not happened, because Sterling was getting tired. He was starting to get hit. And that's the thing about Aljamain Sterling. And I said this to one of the guys there. Aljamain Sterling is not the most impressive striker. And a certain amount of people overall, they may disagree with that. Even with the 4-inch reach advantage, Petr Yan is a couple levels ahead of maybe even more than a couple. He's a few levels above Aljamain Sterling in the striking game. Now, the one area that Petr Yan does struggle with, and I saw someone bring this up in the comments, he does have a little bit of problems not throwing counters when he needs to. But when it came down to it, I thought that he was pressuring him enough. I thought that he was countering good enough here and there to where he was hurting him. He was backing him up. He knocked him down once or twice. And Petr Yan was winning the fight. But that dumb ass knee that he did in the 4th round, it cost him the fight. And you have to call Aljamain Sterling the champion right now. I know he didn't win it in the best way. Was he winning the fight? No. Do you want to win like that? No. But a disqualification is a disqualification. And in my book, that's still a win. It is what it is. I have to be fair here. So it is what it is. I was rooting for Yan, but he fucked it up. So it is what it is. Hopefully in the rematch, they do it again. And I'll root for Yan again, because in my opinion, I do believe he actually is a level above Aljamain Sterling when it comes to really just being a greater fighter. But even in the rematch, who's to say that Aljamain Sterling maybe will not make adjustments? He could go to Petr Yan's legs more, which I thought was going to be maybe a little bit of a problem for Petr. He was able to avoid most of them. Now, there's only so much Aljamain Sterling can do. And when it comes down to, once again, I'm not overly impressed with the striking, because he throws very, very wide. And Petr Yan mentioned that a little bit too, that he's open a lot of the times when he throws. And he said, I'm sure I'll knock him out. Well, you had your chance to, brother, but you made a very dumb, very, very dumb mistake when it came down to the overall in that 4th round. And you have no one else to blame but yourself for losing that belt. So it is what it is when it comes down to it. So it's whatever. But when it comes down to it, Aljamain Sterling did show a certain amount of his flaws in this fight. Now, who knows? He might adjust for the rematch. If you had to give me, if you put me on the spot and ask me who I think is going to win the rematch, most likely Petr Yan. But you still have to count the rematch most likely as a 50-50 fight, because who knows what kind of adjustments Sterling is going to make. And if he ends up losing that rematch, Petr Yan also has no one else to blame but himself, because usually a lot of the times in matchups like these, the victor of the first fight can carry in a confidence load in that second fight. And it's just, man, it's very unfortunate for Petr Yan, but you can't blame anyone else but him. You can't blame anyone else but him. Even if you speak nothing but Russian and all sorts of stuff, and I heard a certain amount of people saying, well, it was his corner and all sorts. Listen, you got to know the UFC rules. You have to know the UFC rules. You've been in the UFC for I don't know how long, for a very decently long time. There's no way that you didn't, there's no possible way that you didn't know the rules to that when it came down to it. So basically there's no one else to blame but Petr Yan. It is what it is. He made a very, very, very stupid mistake. Very stupid mistake. And it cost him the fight. Hopefully we could see a rematch, and we'll just see what happens. But when it comes down to the overall, it's Petr Yan's fault why he didn't win the fight. He could have easily won the fight had he probably even just survived that 5th round. He probably would have stopped him. But he was too stupid. So it is what it is. And once again, this is not the only time that I've seen Petr Yan have a problem with the referee's calls. So it is what it is, or with the rules. So he needs to be a little bit careful in the rematch and try not to fuck it up possibly again. And I seen what he was going for, because Aljamain Sterling, he would get him down on the ground. Aljamain Sterling would go up, and he was trying to knee him while he was lifting up. But maybe, I'm not sure if it was necessarily blatant, because a certain amount of people might ask me, well, do you think that it was blatant, or overall, do you think that it was just in the heat of the moment? You can argue either way. I'm not necessarily sure. But I knew what he was going for when it came down to it. It's very possible that the pressure was just on him from the corner and everything like that. but you have to make sure that their knees are up off the ground. You have to make sure that they're up off the ground. It is what it is. You have to make sure of that. And Piotr Jan just cost himself a fight. Very frustrating end to a fight, but it is what it is. A win is a win. So Aljamain Sterling is now the new 135-pound champion. Congratulations to him. Will he probably keep it for long? We'll see. I think most likely Jan will probably take it in a rematch, but who's to say? Who's to say? We'll see what happens. But anyway. But one thing I will say is that Piotr Jan did look to be pretty much better in every facet. He looked to be better in wrestling, which I actually predicted, because Aljamain Sterling is actually a better grappler than he is a striker. Jan was a decent amount better in the striking game when it came down to it. He was pretty much better in every category, just not in the intelligence category, because he made a very, very... Now, he fought more intelligently until he made that very dumb mistake, but that was the dumbest fucking thing that you could have done overall for that fight. And it is what it is. It's whatever. It cost him the fight. It happens. But it was a very idiotic moment. Hopefully it doesn't happen for Piotr Jan again if he is in a similar situation. That's assuming that he even takes that rematch, meaning overall that he wins that rematch. But we'll see what happens. Anyway, so that's it for that fight. Very frustrating because that, screwed up my predictions a little bit. And I was rooting for Jan because a lot of people were calling him a paper champion, very undeservingly, I thought, because Piotr Jan went through some rough contenders, and a certain amount of people, I just think, disrespect him. But it is what it is. I thought that Piotr Jan was doing a very good job up until that stupid moment, but it is what it is. Anyways, when it comes down to it, that's pretty much it for that. Only thing to do now is wait for the rematch, which hopefully happens. Anyway, so the next fight is going to be Amanda Nunes versus Megan Anderson. This fight pretty much went exactly how I thought it was going to go. And I think this fight pretty much went exactly how everyone thought this fight was going to go. Amanda Nunes dominated Megan Anderson. And when I seen Megan Anderson and Amanda Nunes standing in that ring together, I was like, wow, Megan Anderson is a lot bigger. And this was when I was like, okay, this might be the last opportunity for someone to give Amanda Nunes a challenge, because Megan Anderson is just so much bigger than her. She didn't just look taller than her. She looked thicker than her. She looked possibly 2 weight classes bigger than Amanda Nunes. So that's when Megan Anderson said, I think I'm the first 142, 145 pounder that she's actually going to face. Then I said, wow, maybe overall, that this girl is bigger than the rest. Even bigger than Chris Cyborg. Not necessarily thicker than Chris Cyborg or stockier, but just combined with the length, I thought that it was going to be a problem. But Amanda Nunes started attacking the legs early, pretty much doing what I thought she was going to do. And when it came down to it, she then landed an overhand right, and from then on, it was over. It was just over. Megan Anderson, and I said this, I don't think that she moves enough. I don't think she moves out of the way enough. When it comes down to it, I don't even think she's as good on the ground as Amanda Nunes. And come to find out, she wasn't. Because Amanda Nunes kind of got her in a triangle, and then she got her in an armbar. And basically, that was all it for Megan Anderson. But it is what it is. Amanda, she's just a tough girl, man. Probably the greatest woman fighter that I've ever seen in the UFC. Very dominant, extremely dominant, the most dominant female fighter, probably most dominant female athlete I've seen within a certain amount of years. I wasn't really around during Serena Williams' prime, so I can't necessarily say for her. She's the most dominant female athlete that I've seen in my time. So it is what it is. But when it comes down to the overall, Amanda Nunes is she's one tough cookie, man. She's she's really tough. And I think it's very unfortunate because there's just really no challenges out there for her. She's so dominant that I think a certain amount of people are actually now going to lose interest, because besides Valentina Shevchenko, maybe, there's just no fighters out there that can provide her any challenges at this moment. I just don't see it. I heard Juliana Pena, she wanted to call out Amanda Nunes. She called out Amanda Nunes on Twitter. Listen, she can fight Amanda all she wants to, and maybe that'd be a decent fight to make, because Juliana really is, to be honest, one of the only top contenders that Amanda has not fought at this point. I don't see any fighter that is better in any facet than Amanda Nunes. She is so far ahead of everybody else in the UFC. Not only is she so skilled, not only is she very skilled, she has she is I don't want to make any comparisons here, but she's just one of those fighters where you take a look at and say she's basically the perfect fighter. Not only is she skilled in every asset, she has excellent jiu-jitsu, excellent ground game, she has excellent striking ability, but she has a great power, probably the most powerful girl in the UFC today. Very decent chin, very decent strikes. Decent, kicks, decent gameplay. There's just nothing that any of these other girls have over Amanda Nunes, and I just don't see any of these girls beating Amanda Nunes. I just don't see it unless they get possibly lucky. The only one that's even been able to provide her with a challenge lately has been Valentina Shevchenko. That's all. That's been really the only one. And it's very unfortunate. And even though women's competition, I do think, has caught up with the men a little bit in UFC, not necessarily in boxing. The women's competition in boxing really isn't all that great, but it is what it is. And I'm going to get a certain amount of criticism for that, but it's whatever. When it comes down to the overall in UFC, I do think that this does show that there is a little bit of a lapse in competition in the women's weight classes, unless we're talking about maybe 115. But when it comes down to it, there's just the only one that would possibly provide Amanda Nunes with a challenge if they were in the same weight class would be one of the 115 pounders, one of the elite 115 pounders. If Rose Namajunas was going up in weight or something like that, and if she were able to handle Amanda, but there's no way she'd be able to handle the power. So, I know why you bring it up, but that's the only way Amanda Nunes would ever even be challenged is if Rose Namajunas or Weili Zhang or some of those fighters, Joanna maybe, if somehow they got up and they were able to, handle that weight class. But of course, I don't think that's ever going to happen. But that just shows you the big lapse in competition that there is when it comes to Amanda and everybody else. There's just no competition. Amanda's so far ahead. It's very unfortunate, I think, because I think a certain amount of people are going to tear her down because of that. But it is what it is. She's just the most dominant female fighter we've ever seen. It is what it is. But congratulations to her. I was hoping that Megan Anderson would put up at least a little bit more of a fight. But hey, it's Amanda Nunes. No shame in that. Is what it is. So, that leads us to our main fight. Israel Adesanya versus Jan Blachowicz. So, I predicted Israel Adesanya to win this fight. Was I surprised that Jan Blachowicz won the fight? No, I was not overly surprised. In the first round, what I saw was that this was a regular Israel Adesanya fight. And I said, okay, well, he's going after the legs, basically doing what I thought he was doing. He was sticking his jab out there. I knew that that's what he was going to do. I knew that overall he was going to try to use his speed to his advantage. That was no secret. And that overall he was going to kind of try to do to Jan Blachowicz what he did to Paulo Costa, at least a little bit. He was going to go after the legs, and overall he was going to try to use his reach. And at first, I didn't think Jan Blachowicz was going to be able to reach him because Israel Adesanya's reach looked decently big, even though he only has a 2-inch reach advantage. He just looked lengthier than Jan Blachowicz, and I didn't know if Jan Blachowicz was going to throw enough for him to beat Israel Adesanya, so I was kind of worried about that a little bit. But I said if Jan Blachowicz came in with the right game plan, then he could beat Israel Adesanya. That don't underestimate him. And I was right in that regard, but I was wrong in my main prediction, so I still have to take that one on the chin. It is what it is. The reason why I predicted Israel Adesanya to win is because I thought he was going to attack the legs consistently, which he did, but it just was not enough. In the first round, Israel Adesanya and Jan Blachowicz, somewhat even in the striking, but I gave Israel Adesanya the first round because Israel Adesanya, I thought, landed more leg kicks, and I thought that they were going to give him more credit for that. In the second round, I thought Israel Adesanya won it again. I thought that he won with leg kicks, and overall, I thought that, they both actually went at it a little bit more that round. I remember some of the other people around us, when I was at Buffalo Wild Wings, they said, yeah, they're going at it more this round. So they were throwing a little bit more that round, and it was pretty even on the striking, but I think I gave Israel Adesanya that second round because I thought he was going to the leg kicks. And, I was just annoyed because I was like, man, Jan, you got to throw more. You can't just stare at him. You got to put the jab out there more. You got to go to the body. You got to go to the legs. And it was difficult to go to Israel Adesanya's legs because he's very maneuverable. So he tried to go. He actually did try to go after his legs early, but it was just hard. He didn't actually get to his legs until probably about round 4 or 5. But when it comes down to the third round was the one that was really, really close. When I was talking to another table, and overall they were saying that, I think if Jan wins this round, he might win the fight. I said I think they're going to give it to Israel Adesanya, and I thought they were going to give it to Israel Adesanya. Listen, I'm a boxing person, and I've seen way too many decisions where they just give it to the more popular fighter because they're worth more money. So it is what it is. I thought that was going to be a very similar thing here. Now UFC does not have as bad a decision as boxing does. But when it comes down to it, even in UFC, they still do that a little bit. It's not like we've never seen that before, so it is what it is. So I thought, okay, well, I think they're still going to give this fight to Izzy because it was a very close fight. The first 2 rounds I thought went to Israel Adesanya. Thought he outreached him, thought he got him with leg kicks. I thought Israel Adesanya, won those first 2 rounds. And then the third round was very, very close. When it came down to it, Jan Blachowicz, I believe he got a takedown or at least a semi-takedown. He also got him in the clinch for about a minute. No really striking, but he got him in the clinch, so you have to give him points for that. He was in dominant position, so you have to give him points for that. Striking was very even, so I said, okay, well, come out with the takedown, come out with the clinch. Jan Blachowicz probably won that round. So Jan Blachowicz, I gave him round 3. Round 4 came in, and Israel's starting to get hit with a little bit more now. But I do remember it being even in the striking. I think he even actually hurts Jan Blachowicz, I believe, with the right. And I said, oh, God, here we go. Israel overall is going to get to him. But then Jan Blachowicz takes him down. And a certain amount of people might have expected a clinch battle or a ground game battle. I've never really seen that side of Jan Blachowicz before because I guess he's never had to use it. But in this fight, he did. And he used his weight. He used his skills to his advantage. And he got Israel down on the ground. And he did not let Israel Adesanya get up. So it is what it is. And I said, okay, well, he's clearly got this 4th round. And a certain amount of people were thinking the same thing I was thinking heading into that 5th round, that it was 2 rounds to 2. There was another person also that had it 3 rounds to 1 for Israel Adesanya going into the 5th round. And I saw their point because I said, okay, well, I understand. Then going into that 5th round, it was close. Israel Adesanya, I believe, actually gets hit with a couple shots. None that he got overly hurt by, but there was a couple that stunned him. When it came down to it. And Jan Blachowicz, like I said, a certain amount of people were just predicting him to dominate, Jan Blachowicz like Paulo Costa. I thought that Israel was going to try and do the same strategy. But if he was going to treat Jan Blachowicz the same as Paulo Costa, which I don't think he did some different things, then overall he was going to get killed in this fight because Jan Blachowicz is not Paulo Costa. Paulo Costa is a very one-dimensional fighter. Jan Blachowicz, he has a multitude of facets to his game. And he's a very excellent counterpuncher. He's extremely accurate, and he can knock you out with one punch. And we're going to talk about that here in a minute because I do think that affected Israel Adesanya to a degree. But when it comes down to it, that 5th round came, and overall, eventually, once again, Blachowicz got him down to the ground again for basically the second half of that round. Got him down, did not let Israel Adesanya back up. And, he won those last 2 rounds for sure. And so the wonder was... And you could tell the commentating team that they were completely on Israel's, whatever you want to call it. They were completely going for Israel. It is what it is. The commentating team sometimes is a little bit biased, and I thought that they were a little bit biased towards Israel. Someone even said on Facebook that Joe Rogan was deep-throating Israel the whole entire time, which he kind of was, but it is what it is. That being said, I thought that they were going to give it to Israel Adesanya because I thought the leg kicks might have been enough, and I thought, well, Israel's a more popular fighter. They want this double champ thing to continue happening, and they probably want Israel Adesanya versus John Jones fight eventually. So I assume they're going to give it to Israel Adesanya. And I know that sounds probably negative or a certain amount of other things, but you got to understand, once again, I watch boxing a lot, UFC as well, and a lot of the times they will give it to the more popular guy if it's a close fight. UFC does not have as much of a trend of doing this, though. And when it came down to, when I heard the scorecards, what were the scorecards? I think one was 49-46, another one was 49-45, and another one was 49-45, which means that 2 of them, I think, had to score around 10-8. When I heard that scorecard, I was like, wow, you got to be kidding me. But as soon as I heard the scorecard, I knew that Jan Blachowicz won, because I said, well, there's no way that they gave Israel Adesanya those last 2 rounds. They had to have given Jan Blachowicz those last 2 rounds, so he had to have won this fight. And I was so surprised at how wide the decision was. I don't think that it was that far apart. I thought that it was 3 rounds to 2. But when it comes down to it, I could maybe see 4 rounds to 1. But when it came down to it, I would probably say 3 rounds to 2. 3 rounds to 2 for Jan Blachowicz, in my opinion, is a right score. If one of those last rounds was 10-8, hey, so be it. I probably would have not scored at 10-8, but it is what it is. That being said, do I disagree with the decision? I don't disagree that Jan Blachowicz won the fight, but I do disagree with how far apart the scorecards were. That's what I'm going to say. So, if you had to ask me, what lost Israel Adesanya this fight? Well, of course, Jan Blachowicz overall, with his size and with his ground game and with his clinch, I do think affected Israel Adesanya to a certain degree when it came down to it. Of course, we know that aspect. But Israel Adesanya does have certain flaws in his game that I think a certain amount of people do not realize. He is not extremely great at avoiding a jab, and there's just certain fighters overall that are like that. I've seen Jan Blachowicz land a certain amount of jabs. In fact, to be honest with you, I thought he actually needed to throw it more a little bit yesterday when it came down to it. I don't think he actually threw it enough. So, I thought Jan Blachowicz was doing a decent job with the jab, but I thought he could have been doing it a little bit more because a lot of the jabs that he was throwing, and he is a very accurate puncher, he's not necessarily a combination puncher, which worried me a little bit, but when it came down to the overall, he threw enough to win, I guess. But when it comes down to it, I said, well, he's not necessarily a combination puncher, so let's just see what happens here. And he was able to be accurate enough, I think, to win the fight. But when it comes down to it, I thought they needed to throw the jab out there a little bit more. I thought he needed to go to the legs a little bit more. And he did. I remember one vicious leg kick that he landed, especially in the 5th round, and it hurt Israel. It knocked Israel a little bit off balance. And I think he needed to do that a little bit more in the fight. Thankfully for him, he still won the fight, but it is what it is. But why do I think he won this fight? I think that Israel Adesanya was very afraid of Jan Blachowicz' power. I think he got in there and he realized that this guy was not just another Paulo Costa, that he was an extremely accurate counterpuncher, and that overall he was someone not to be fucked with, basically, when it comes down to put it very bluntly. Like I said, Jan Blachowicz is not a Paulo Costa. A lot of people thought Jan Blachowicz was just this one-dimensional fighter going in there and that he'd be way too slow. Jan Blachowicz has got some speed. He's extremely accurate when it comes down to it. Very excellent counterpuncher, and he can knock you out with one shot. So when it comes down to it, was I overly surprised that Jan Blachowicz got the fight? No, I wasn't overly surprised. But it is what it is. That being said, Israel Adesanya, do I think that this weight class is a little bit too big for him? Maybe. But a part of it also is just that Israel Adesanya is maybe just not as great as some of those other two-weight champions. It is what it is. And for a certain amount of people, they might think that that's a little bit harsh. I don't hate Israel Adesanya or anything like that. I don't hate any of these athletes. I'm not a fan of any of these athletes. I'm not a hater of any of these athletes. When it comes down to the overall, I put everyone on an even playing field. And when it comes down to it, what I will say is this. Israel Adesanya is a great fighter. There's no doubt about that. One of my friends, he was hoping for Jan Blachowicz to win. And I was kind of rooting for Jan Blachowicz as well. Just because, a lot of people were underestimating him, I think, in this fight. And I think he deserved more respect. But when it comes down to it, one of my friends said, Israel's a hype job now after he lost this fight. I don't think Israel Adesanya is a hype job. But I do think he belongs more at the middleweight. I think that he does not have enough skills to necessarily beat a Jan Blachowicz at at 205 at light heavyweight when it comes down to it. So I think that, a part of it was the weight. But if Israel Adesanya was a great enough fighter, he would have won this fight yesterday. It is what it is. He just was not able to get a lot of strikes in there because Jan Blachowicz had very decent defense. On top of that, Jan Blachowicz was also very accurate himself, and you could tell Israel was scared to throw certain punches sometimes, afraid of getting countered, which he should have been to a degree. But I thought Israel actually even should have attacked the legs a little bit more and should have went to the body a little bit more. But it is what it is. That being said, overall, I don't think that it was a horrible performance, but I do think some of Israel Adesanya's flaws got exposed yesterday. So it is what it is. Once again, he does not avoid a jab very well. If you attack his legs and attack his body, overall he will get a little bit jumpy. So it is what it is, meaning overall that he will not throw as much. So it is what it is. So that's pretty much my story, and I'm sticking to it. Not overly surprised by the results, although I was surprised how wide the scorecards were. And that's really about it for today. Thank you guys so much for watching. The only thing I can really say out of this whole fight, I'm really hoping that an Aljamain Sterling versus Piotr Jan rematch happens. We'll see what happens. Jan Blachowicz, as for him, maybe he'll fight Rakic next, or however you pronounce his name. Could be Glover Teixeira. I really have no idea. As for Israel Adesanya, sounds like he's going to go back down to middleweight, and we'll see what happens. That's really about it for today. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll talk to you all later.